Who would have thought? Here we are. Hi, everybody. It's Capt Ron here with my crew. And my crew is getting bigger there. We got Dieter with us, Diane, Eric, and we've got a special guest, Jim Duke, that's going to talk to us a little bit tonight. And first thing, welcome.
They're getting bigger in size, right, Ron? You didn't
that. Yeah.
The COVID size.
We'd like to welcome everybody to Fearless Flight Live. It's a weekly show here on Facebook for anybody who has a fear of flying, who knows somebody with a fear of flying, or who just likes to talk about airplanes and flying. And the next thing, we always invite people, if you're not a member of our Fearless Flight Birds of a Feather group, we encourage you to go over there. You can see the link at the bottom and register with the group, and we'll get you in. Leave a little note there, introduce yourself, and it's a give and take group. We love it when you if you need some support, or if you got a little support to give to somebody. It's an active group and getting more active. For tonight, we're going to talk just a little bit about the webinar that we had over the weekend, which we had some special offers to people in the group that joined us with that. A poll question that we want you to consider is, did you travel? And of course, we're interested in flying over this Labor Day weekend. We got some stats that show that traffic was up, not only here in the Phoenix area, but around the country. And then, as I said, we'll talk to our special guest, Jim Duke. And last thing, we got just a couple of things that we want to talk about related to aviation news roundup. So, okay. I think we're going to invite Jim to come on in here now. Jim was somebody that we met, I think, Jim, wasn't it back in 2017 or 2018 over in Burbank?
October 2017.
2017, yeah. So it's coming up on just almost three years now. So anyway, so just if you would just introduce yourself and just a little bit of a bio on you and how when you know in your history with fear of flying.
All right, hi everybody. I'm Jim Duke. I live in California. Lived here for 34 years, and I'm a retired educator, but I've also worked as a journalist and as a broadcaster. And I'm currently doing some volunteer work with my church to keep me busy during the pandemic. When I moved to California in 1986, I decided to go visit my grandmother who lived in Richmond, Virginia, which is a long flight. I flew to Virginia. On the return flight, the flight from Richmond to Chicago was great. The flight from Chicago to Ontario was not great. Like many people, I think probably in the audience, we encountered some pretty rough turbulence over Colorado, sort of rattled my nerves a little bit. And then when we landed in Ontario, it was really windy, and it was kind of a very windy landing at Ontario. And unfortunately, I got off the plane and drove an hour and 20 minutes home without having talked to the pilot. And I vowed never to fly again because it was such a traumatic experience. I really don't like turbulence at all. And so for 31 years, I burned up the rails on Amtrak, 36-hour trips to Seattle, 12-hour trips to San Francisco and Sacramento. And then interestingly enough, when I retired from my job in June of 2017, I'd been involved with another teacher, and she wanted me to chaperone some of her field trips because I was free. It wasn't working. I was able to go. And one of them involved a senior trip, which I assumed was going to be someplace like San Diego or Los Angeles in a bus. And I got a call one day from my friend who's an assistant principal, and he said, "Did you know that you're going to fly to Orlando or fly to San Francisco?" And I went, huh? And everybody who knew me knew that I don't fly. I've passed on a lot of professional opportunities and personal trips because of that. And he said, "Do you want me to tell her?" And I said, "No, give me a little bit of time to work on it." So I did a search. I found Air Hollywood, but they didn't have any classes going on their schedule at that moment. So I kind of Googled and found you and found Fearless Flight and made contact with you. And that trip was going to be in May of 2018. So I had actually planned to come drive to Phoenix. It's not that far from my house, not much traffic. And I was going to come to a class, and then I was going to come back a month later and fly. and you reached out to me and said, "Hey, we're coming to Burbank in October," and I signed right up.
And it's been, say, downhill ever since then, or uphill? I get downhill, huh? Easier. So how many times you've flown? Quite a number of times since that time, haven't you, Jim?
I have. I flew the day we flew from Burbank to Las Vegas and back. I decided a few months later I needed to practice on my own, so I drove to Ontario. The terrorizing landing that I had before, I wanted to face that as well, and I flew to Las Vegas and I flew back. And then we flew to San Francisco in May of 2018. I flew to Tampa in June of 2018, and I flew to Newark last year in October of 2019. So as they say in the aviation business, I've done, counting class, I've done 10 cycles in 3 years.
Nice. And so, on a scale of 1 to 10, I guess if you're not flying, that's like an 11. Right? If you hadn't flown in 31 years. So when you came to the class in Burbank there, where were you at for people who are trying to identify with your story, in terms of what were your expectations that day when you came to the class?
I was, as a kid and as a young adult, I flew all the time. I flew back and forth to the East Coast to see my grandparents. I've flown overseas. I've even done a long flight from LA to Sydney, Australia. It was a long flight. I've flown to Hawaii a number of times. It was just that one incident. So I think when I came to class, I was, number one, hoping I wouldn't disappoint my friend and be able to go with her on a culinary field trip to San Francisco. And I wanted to expand my travel horizons because there are places you can't go on a train that I still want to go on my bucket list. So I came there hoping that I would learn enough to get over my fear of turbulence, which I did. And I got a couple of little turbulence stories that have happened since then, if I have a chance to tell them, how I've actually used what I learned from you to help other people on a flight with me in 2 instances when we encountered some turbulence. But I met people that I love the way you handled the class. You had us, I felt like I was walking in there probably the only person who was going to be scared to fly. And I was terrified. I really was. And the way you started class by having us introduce us to someone next to us, I met Michelle standing next to me, and we talked, and I thought, oh, I'm not the only person here. There's a lot of people here. And that put me at ease, and I just wanted to learn everything I could. I wasn't sure I was going to take the flight that afternoon. I had booked it. After sitting in the class, there was no question I was going. And I didn't tell any of my friends I was doing this. So I have a pretty big presence on social media. And so when I got to the airport in Burbank and the plane pulled up to take us to Las Vegas, I snapped a picture of it and posted it and said, looks like my ride to Burbank is here. And my friends flooded my social media. What? You're going on a plane? You're flying somewhere? Nobody could believe it.
Yeah. And so the main thing is 31 years you hadn't flown, you got your courage up to go to the class. Were you anxious driving up, getting to the class, and when we started the class, and did you notice your anxiety lessen at any point in time? Did it go up and down? What was it like until the time you got to the airport for when we launched to Las Vegas?
Well, I had been on a cruise, so I just drove up from Long Beach, which is the picture behind me.
Oh, that's right.
To Burbank for the class. I was excited when I came to class because I like to learn. I've been in education all my life. I wanted to learn, but I was also very nervous about am I really going to get on this plane? But I can tell you that being in the simulator at Air Hollywood and the turbulence that we had there, and just everything that we were told that day, that the quality of the instruction made me feel very confident. And so when we were driving to the airport, and I think Dieter rode with me to the airport maybe, and let's talk about taking your life in your hands to ride somewhere with me on the freeway.
Exactly.
We got to the airport, and I think you asked me what was my anxiety level, and I said I'm probably about a 2 or a 3, which 31 years of never flying again was a pretty big step for me. But I don't look back and I don't regret it. And it's one of the best things I've ever done. And it really has changed my life.
So when we did the webinar on Saturday, talking about, we opened it with talking about emotions because part of it is knowledge, knowing more about aviations and airplanes and flying and all that. But the other part happens really we need to learn how to quell that anxiety inside of us, and learning won't take care of all of that, particularly if you have more of an emotional trigger. And when I talked about people, it's, emotions, particularly negative emotions, and particularly for fearful flyers, when you get anxious about flying, when you think about turbulence, when you're really amped up like that, it doesn't feel like it's happening. It feels like somebody's actually doing something to you. It feels almost like an external force, but it really is coming from within our own bodies there, but it's just like that. And so it's really, it's interesting to hear you. And I love being a teacher. I think I share your interest there, your passion. I have a great curiosity myself, and it sounds like your curiosity is what really, really is your passion. And so you put that to work. It sounds like, learning as much as you could and soaking it up that day.
And one thing you said, I heard you say, Jim, I wasn't sure I was getting on the airplane, and that is a super common statement from everybody in the 201, 301 class where they go. They either say, I wasn't sure I was going to go, or they were positive they weren't going to go, and they were clutching their $100 tickets in their fists like a used bubblegum wrapper, and were just kind of eyeballing where the nearest trash can was on the way out the door.
Well, I can tell you that I sort of felt that way when I arrived at class, and when class was over, I'm like, I'm flying to Las Vegas. I'm doing this. It's now or never. And as I tell people, there's 2 steps to overcome your fear. One is to acknowledge that you have a fear, and the 2 is to do something about it. And I've always known, I always knew I had that fear of flying, and that was the day I did something about it.
Cool. And one thing that we notice every week, except I think you've only missed like 1 or 2 weeks. We look down and Jim Duke is on the show every night on the other side of that. So why do you do that? I mean, you're doing so well. What makes you why can't we get rid of you, Jim?
I'm
glad you laughed, because there was a delay in the audio there. So I thought, this is not going to work out well.
No, I think the secret of, right now I'm not flying. I haven't flown. It'll be almost a year. It was over a year from June of 2018 to October 2019. But I stay engaged. I come because the topics are interesting. I learned so much from you and from Captain Eric and from Diane and from Dieter and from all the people who have been on the show. I was totally fascinated with the professor's research that I downloaded a copy of the dissertation and I read it. Because that kind of stuff interests me. I think keeping my mind engaged with being a no longer fearful flyer, so to speak, it's always a work in progress. I just think staying engaged, that's why you can't get rid of me, and you probably never will.
We hope not. We hope not. And you have been more than just a loyal viewer. You've been a supporter. You've actually sent donations, and I really want to thank you for that. We really appreciate that. Let's talk about the flight. And people. What you said, you had some experiences with turbulence, and I think that would be more interesting than anybody out there.
When I flew to Las Vegas on my own in February of 2018, the flight from Ontario to Las Vegas was great. When I spent the night, went out to eat, watched the hockey game, and then the next day I flew back. When I left the hotel, the wind was just howling in Las Vegas, as it does. And we got to the airport, and I got on the plane, and I'm thinking, okay, it's probably going to be a little bit of turbulence. And we took off, and it was really turbulent. I pretty much always have to have a window seat. I stare out the window the entire flight and watch the country go by. It's kind of my way. I'm not really too claustrophobic, but having that view is really important to me. So I snagged a window seat. A couple sat next to me in the next 2 seats. We took off. It was bumpy. The plane sort of moved a little bit, kind of hard to the side. And I thought, wow, that's a little bit of wind probably. And we kept climbing, and it kept being kind of turbulent, and we leveled off at whatever the altitude was. And the lady who was sitting in the middle seat tapped me on the arm, and she said, my husband and I were holding hands and praying during takeoff. We absolutely are in awe of how calm you were throughout that whole thing. And I said to her, well, ma'am, here's what I know. I know that turbulence is not going to cause the plane to crash. It's uncomfortable. It's annoying. It's a surprise when it happens out of nowhere like that was. But I know the people up front are in control and they know what they're doing. And there's triple redundancy in the 737. I kind of gave a little spiel from class and I said, that's what, and so the landing in Ontario was great. I was one of the last people off the plane. I had brought a little gift to give to the flight crew, some toffee from a local place I usually take when I fly somewhere. And so I wanted to be the last person. I gave it to the flight attendant and I said, could I talk to the pilot? And she said, yeah, he's leaving, walking. He said, walk with me up the jetway. And I said, tell me about that takeoff in Las Vegas. And he said, well, we hit a plus 40 crosswind as we were taking off. And he says, what you want to know is, were we ever in any danger? And I said, no, I know the answer to that. Thank you. And I drove home because I wasn't going to repeat driving an hour and 20 minutes from Ontario with some other story going in my head.
Nice.
I think after what those other passengers said to you after they were holding hands across the aisle and got off, that you lost a career opportunity in automobile sales.
Probably so.
I feel like you could have been somebody.
My second experience was last October flying from Newark to Phoenix. We took off in a thunderstorm and rainstorm, which was really cool. That wasn't a problem. But I think we were probably over eastern New Mexico. And the pilot came on and he said, we're going to encounter some pretty rough turbulence in about 10 minutes. I'm going to ask the flight attendants to stop service and to take their seats. The guy sitting next to me, I'd had a little conversation with him. He flies all the time for a living to South America and all over the country. And he looks at me when the pilot said that and he goes, oh, great. I hate turbulence. To which I said, why do you hate turbulence? And he told me, and I said, you know, he's let us know. It's not going to be a surprise. They know what they're doing. We'll be fine. Just relax. And so I will tell you that the turbulence was like minimal. I experienced much more turbulence taking off from Las Vegas than that was supposed to be. So, yeah. but I said to him, you know, not a big deal. Just relax. Enjoy the ride.
So apparently they can take you can take the boy out of the classroom, but you can't take the classroom out of the boy. So
that would be correct.
There's a couple of things I wanna say. First of all, yeah, we have another long time, Michelle Villa. You're watching, Michelle, and she's saying, Jim, I love hearing your story. And you guys were in the same class, right? Originally.
Yeah.
And I had the distinct pleasure of actually sitting next to you, Jim, on our flight.
And I sat next to Michelle.
And it was just really, really cool. But I wanted to actually kind of ask you to let our viewers know, because we're always talking about mindfulness, but also about focusing our mind on things that are empowering, things that are keeping us in a space where we do have access to the kinds of information that you so expertly are passing on to other people. When you take off, at least for the first few times, what is it that you did that helped you kind of focus? There's something, yeah.
That's a good question. I put my camera against the window and I film takeoff and I film landing. And I usually do about a minute or so, or a minute and a half of takeoff and probably 2 minutes of landing. For two reasons: it occupies my mind of we're taking off and I'm not worried about the rollout down the runway or any turbulence we might hit on the way up. I'm focused on my camera, keeping it still and running the film. But also I use it. I go back. If I'm going to fly again in the next month or so, I would go back and watch every single takeoff video and every single landing video, because it helps me to remember that moment. And and I posted on my social media. I think I've even shared some with the group.
I was just going to mention, yeah, it's in the Birds of a Feather group. If anybody wants to see your takeoffs and landings, just type in takeoff and Jim Duke and it'll pop up the post. So go ahead, Jim, sorry.
But anyway, that's how I keep my mind occupied. You know, I had listened to the harmonizer in the morning sitting in the airport in Las Vegas. And then I decided to put my headphones in my carry-on bag when I got on board the plane and stowed it above. If ever I had probably wanted the harmonizer, it was on that takeoff. And of course, I didn't have it. So I just sat there thinking in my head, this is only turbulence. I kept looking out the window. Yeah, we're still climbing. We're going to be good. I had all the faith in the world in those pilots, and I knew I would get home to Ontario. And I will say this, it is safer to fly than it is to drive in a car. When I came to class in October 7, 2017, I stayed overnight after we got back from Las Vegas because it's about a 3-hour drive home for me. And I drove home the next morning and I was almost hit by a car on the freeway that made a sudden lane change. I had to slam on my brakes to avoid it. And in that moment, the thought in my head was, I was safer yesterday on the plane to Las Vegas than I am on this freeway.
Well, especially if you're driving home from Las Vegas, because even if you spent half the time in church and the rest of the time sleeping, nobody else did. Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah. You know, I will say that, you know, I have been to really one interesting place flying. I did say I flew to Tampa. I actually went to Cuba. And that was the purpose of going to Tampa. And it was kind of on my bucket list. And I thought Amtrak is not taking me to Cuba. So, you know, one of the side benefits, I also did a New England. I like to cruise. I've been on 88 of them. Right now, it's driving me crazy to be on land. But, you know, I cruised to New England last year. I don't know if Susan's watching. I made my first visit to Boston, which I totally loved. And then I visited Quebec and the Maritime provinces of Canada, places I'd never been. I would not have made those trips were it not for you guys.
Yeah, well, we appreciate it. And, you know, as I listen to you, Jim, these are just classic things that we've recommended for years for people to do. Get more education. Be curious about yourself, about how, you know, even when you get on and you know, it's not, I hear you, it's not an obsession to have a window, but it's a goal to have a window. And because you have a plan for when you get there, it's not like you're paranoid about it, but you do that. So you have a plan. And that's what I think the hardest thing to convey to people is if you wait until the night before or the day that you go fly, and that's the first time you ever take any action to prepare yourself, you know, it's probably going to be very difficult, if not the same results as you got last time. And so that's the thing that I really encourage people to stay connected with us or with somebody that can get you more information, can answer your questions, and can engage you like you've done for yourself. And I'm really, really proud to know you, and you got to be really, really proud of yourself for what you've accomplished in such a short time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And as I say, it's been a life-changing experience. And I look back and think that was probably one of the best things I've done in the last 20 years.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time again tonight, Jim. And you could stay with us if you want. We're just going to go through a few things in the aviation news roundup, and then we're going to call it an evening here. So, and you know,
don't take that spruce goose out of that building behind you, Jim. I'm watching.
It's not there. It's not there anymore.
Physically,
it used to be there, but they moved it. Now Carnival Cruise Lines has converted that into a cruise terminal for all their ships. It's absolutely the most beautiful cruise terminal I've ever been in.
Wow. That's crazy.
Did they take the goose to the Smithsonian?
I think they moved it somewhere in Oregon. But
I remember that years ago.
Washington State. I remember when they did that.
I remember.
For those of you listening and don't know what the spruce goose is, it was built out of plywood, right, Eric? And it was I think it was the largest propeller powered airplane ever built by Howard Hughes, who was an aviation.
Right.
So,
and I'll just throw one last thing about that photo. The photo I took from a cruise ship, it was actually night. That is the night mode on my iPhone.
Wow.
So it actually looks like it's sunset, but it was dark.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
6 p.m. on a December night.
Wow.
Nice.
Cool.
Nice.
So let me just we had a poll question, and I know that you already answered that, Jim, and the poll question was, did you travel over the Labor Day weekend? And if you did you travel by air? Did you go by car, by train, or any other modes of transportation? And the reason we are asking that question is because we actually got some numbers in over or numbers about the Labor Day weekend as far as aviation is concerned. And I'm just going to switch to the presentation, Ron, and then I'm going to let you.
Okay. Yeah.
go.
So these are some numbers that Dieter found. It shows that people are showing up in greater numbers now. So what I think with the 900,000 twice over. So that's twice over
the Labor Day weekend. So basically they were every day. I think the next slide actually there you go. Mm-hmm. So over the long weekend we had numbers in terms of on Friday almost 1 million people, on Monday almost 1 million people, and even on Thursday there were almost 900,000 passengers screened. But the real kicker is, and that's what really blew me away, that is a far cry from last year Labor Day travel in aviation, which was at 2 million people passing through the TSA checkpoints in 2019. So travel is definitely up. And I think I heard you say, Ron, it's back up to levels in March. Is that true?
Yeah, it was approximating what it was before the country kind of went into lockdown. So people are starting to either get atrophied or used to it, or just they've decided that it's time to get out there for whatever reason.
But you can see
they probably watched Arnold Barnett on that show a week or 2 weeks ago and said, "Oh, yeah, that's not so bad. The airline should be writing a check to Arnold, but they don't have any money to actually give him."
Yeah,
that's true. I had some passengers because I worked this past weekend, not only from the vacationers and folks if they're quote unquote last hurrah before the fall starts, but I had several of my passengers who were college students. So some of the colleges are back up to having either complete person-to-person classrooms again, teaching, or they're doing a hybrid of online and in the classroom. So some of those travelers were college kids that were going back to school or going to school for the first time.
So even what I'm hearing you say, Diane, is that even with your numbers in, let's say, Arizona or whatever, mm-hmm. you have college student like either physically returning back to school or some kind of hybrid version?
Some of them, but I was flying. I was in Houston. I was in Palm Springs. I was over this. My 3-day trip took me a lot of different places. So some of the kids were not Arizona kids going to school in Arizona. Some of them were going to college in California and whatever. So there was just kind of a combination. So it seemed as though there were some schools, college level schools, which were back in session, so that there were kids coming from the East Coast and making their way out west to go.
The reason I'm asking is because in Canada, all universities have elected to do online only, at least for the first semester, and then evaluate just
right. Well, my second grandchild just completed her first year in college, and she is going back to school. In fact, I think my daughter and my son-in-law drove her back to Montana. She's a sophomore at Montana State in Bozeman, and they're completely back full bore as far as in-person classes. So
I don't want to be Mr. Negative, but I did see a deal where Arizona was a bit of a slow learner coming out of the gate. But we've been doing very, very well, where we cut it 50% week after week after week. Not last week, since ASU and U of A got back in, we had a 20% bump off of last week on the increase. Not that they're related, but you certainly would have your suspicions.
Well, that's a perfect segue into this next one, because who spotted this? Was it you, Diane?
I saw it in the newspaper a couple of days ago. It was a very nice article in the Arizona Republic that the technology that is available has been implemented in several other airports, has come to Sky Harbor. In fact, and I looked it up, there's they're in the two terminals that we have left, Terminal 3 and Terminal 4. There are escalators which have an in armrest UV mechanism, which is a continuous sanitization product for the handrails, so that you're not seeing the machinery or the mechanics of it. It's underneath the arm rail. And I don't know where it is because it's strange, but even though I'm a flight attendant, I never use the escalators anymore. I just get off my plane and hit the elevator to get to my car to go home. Because that's what we do. That's the first thing we want to do is to go home. Now stop laughing. Anyway, so.
It of course has nothing to do with the amount of luggage you're carrying that you can't go up and down the escalator.
No, nothing like that. No,
Right.
nothing like that.
And-
It's a continuous, and the article went on, it's a continuous disinfecting, sanitizing process, so that I'm assuming they're going to do testing to see the efficacy. And then obviously this is a capital expenditure. So ultimately, I suspect the goal is to put those in all of the escalators in both of the terminals. I would hope that was the plan.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to find out if they are in a test phase. Pittsburgh, I saw today after you alerted me to this, Diane, I saw
Right.
Pittsburgh was supposedly the first airport to get it, and I think this, based on some of the talk we've had before, things that will change for the better and never go back. This will probably be
Right.
one of them. So
Right,
regardless,
exactly.
once we get through the COVID-19, it should make it healthier going to and from the airplane.
Right.
And as Arnold pointed out, or we pointed out in conjunction with Arnold, you're much safer on the airplane because of the filters and the airflow than
Right.
you are walking through the terminal. So
Yeah.
this is a move in the right direction there. So
Yeah, exactly.
okay.
Exactly.
Okay, so the last thing we want to talk about is the Dreamliner is in the news. Eric keeps his ear to the ground and all this stuff, and there's like 2 or 3 problems that you were going to touch on, Eric, and without having anybody panic and make sure they do not take these safety pins out of their ejection seat before you talk. All right?
Right. I think I have it down. Dieter, get your finger by the button in case I go too far.
Yes.
Boeing has been in the news the last couple of days with some Dreamliner production problems. And this is not helpful with the timing, both of the CV-19 and the MAX getting recertified and going back out in deliveries again. But they've had some separate issues. One, a production line issue from the plant in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the other 2 were assembly issues that Boeing detected itself via computer tracking on the airplane, separate types of assembly issues. So they self-disclose this stuff to the FAA, and they're tracking down the airplanes that these things might apply to. Not only did they detected it themselves, they self-disclosed that the FAA, who usually always reacts on the conservative side, is not concerned enough to issue even an advisory directive, which is a required maintenance directive, not issue an advisory directive or be concerned with any kind of groundings or anything like that. Yet they're just chasing after this to find which airplanes may be impacted and what the nature of the possible problem might be. So in another week, we'll have much more detail. I hope many sources are kind of on the story now. We can probably talk specifics at that time.
So there was one small bit of good news in Boeing. In the 737 MAX division, they were experiencing schadenfreude that the latest wasn't in their division. Okay, just kidding, folks. Okay, and if you don't get that joke, contact Eric Larson at okay.
Well, there
All right.
actually, to be really fair, there have been really good developments in terms of the MAX recertification, both with the European agency as well with the FAA and the Canadians as well, because now Boeing
Yeah.
has to satisfy not just the FAA and everybody's taking the lead. Now Boeing has to have 3 different groups of certifications basically and testing. And I mean, at this point, for their own sakes, I mean, I really hope
Yeah,
that
I think Boeing has
They need
finally
some good
achieved
news.
that position where the only way to go is literally up.
Up.
So anyway, all right. So thanks to everybody. Thanks again to you, Jim, for joining us tonight and your shiny face there. And keep flying. Stay with us and keep joining us every week. And thanks to Dieter, to Diane, and Eric. And we'll see you all next week at Fearless Flight Live. Have a great week and fly safe
yeah.
and stay safe.